Hey everybody, we're at part 2 of my list, and it seems funny that we're starting with 1993 because that's actually where the Something Cinematic list originally started. So from here on out, here's the original list I comprised for the Something Cinematic countdown. And with 1993, my favorite movie from that year is Jurassic Park. You know, 1993 really was Steven Spielberg's year. I mean, he had his biggest financial hit with Jurassic Park, and he had his biggest critical hit with Schindler's List. And both of those are really amazing movies that just show off what a great filmmaker Steven Spielberg is. But for me, one of the questions that I have to ask myself when picking which movie I prefer over another one is, which would I rather watch? And Jurassic Park, funny thing is, it's a movie I actually did not watch when it first came out because it kind of scared me. Though eventually I did watch it and I totally got into it. I remember having a ton of action figures for that movie. And I had the big playset with that was like a recreation of the main building, and I had heaven knows how many dinosaur action figures. There is a lot to like about Jurassic Park. I mean, I talked about how scary it was, and you know, the scenes where the dinosaurs break loose, those were pretty frightening, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you know, the first scene where the T-Rex breaks out, I mean, you know, there's no music, it's all dark, you pretty much just get the sound of, like, the characters screaming, and, you know, I like the fact that the T-Rex, even though the lawyer is the first person he kills, you know, he does not play favorites, he goes after the heroes as well. I will say that the lead characters are not the best. Maybe not. Well, I suppose I shouldn't say that. Maybe I'm just comparing them to something like Jaws, where you got 3 great characters on that boat. But you know, Alan Grant is an entertaining character, and I think I'm sorry, so many people hate him. I find Jeff Goldblum tremendously entertaining, and I'm sure a lot of you realize this from the numerous times I've done impressions of him. Well, you know, you stood on the shoulders of great men, and you know, you don't really understand what you've done, and you know, you've patented it, you've packaged it, and now you're selling it. You're selling it. And I don't care if this is the movie that just starred the Jeff Goldblum character. I still find him tremendously entertaining. But I think we all know who the real stars are. You know, the Nostalgia Critic joked about this. The stars of this movie are the dinosaurs. Spielberg knew that, and he delivered on it. From 1994, we have Forrest Gump. 1994 was another surprisingly stacked year for movies. You had The Lion King, you had Ed Wood, you had The Shawshank Redemption, you had Pulp Fiction. And I came so close to picking another tie because all those movies are so good, but I'm trying to cut down on the number of ties. And you know, it's one of my favorite movies ever. I gotta go with Forrest Gump, because it is... I talked about Terminator 2 being a movie I shouldn't have watched as a kid. This is obviously a lot tamer in terms of what it delivers, but at the same time I find it funny that I not only watched this movie as a kid, but I really liked it as a kid. And it's hard to put my finger on why I liked it so much as a kid. I mean, as an adult I understand why I liked it, because it's this odyssey. And I guess part of it was the fact that I was beginning to understand it. Like, I remember as a kid, he thinking, oh, that's so funny. Forrest Gump doesn't realize that his great-great-grandfather founded one of the most horrible organizations in history. But there's just so much, and Forrest Gump as a character just has a lot of charm to him, and you know, sometimes he does bad things, like he tries to solve a lot of his problems by beating people up, and, you know, even when he does those bad things, you still kind of sympathize with him because he just doesn't know better. But this movie just has so much going for it. Tom Hanks' performance as Forrest Gump is just so good, and Robert Zemeckis. I've already talked about Roger Rabbit, so I should probably talk about this now. I think Robert Zemeckis is really like our generation's Frank Capra. He just, he captures these good, heartwarming movies about realistic heroes. And I really hope that Flight, if I may get off a little subject on it, but I really hope Flight really is a return to form. I saw that movie and I thought it was pretty good. Not one of his best movies, but, it was good. Like, 3 out of 4 star material. But I'm really hoping that is the movie where he gets back on his feet and starts making movies like this again, because he is such a special director, and I think movies like Forrest Gump, Back to the Future, I think that shows why. Favorite movie from 1995 is 12 Monkeys. He may be known as the master of disaster, but Terry Gilliam is one of my favorite directors. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what I'm talking about when I use the nickname Master of Disaster, Terry Gilliam tends to make movies that are good, but not exactly big money makers. Like some of you may have heard me talk about in the past how I consider Time Bandits to be a very underrated movie. That wasn't exactly a box office smash or a critical darling, and the fact that I refer to it as an underrated movie kind of shows that even nowadays it doesn't have the biggest audience in the world. But one of the movies that really crossed into the mainstream was 12 Monkeys, and this is another movie that's, I talked about being a big fan of the Terminator earlier, and this movie is a little like the Terminator. I'm not calling it a ripoff, I'm just saying that, they're kind of cut from the same cloth. And it's so interesting. This has Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, two people who are known for more popcorn movies, more crowd pleasers, and they give really good performances in this movie. Bruce Willis, I remember reading somewhere that Terry Gilliam gave Bruce Willis a list of cliches he wanted him to avoid in this movie, and this is definitely a serious departure from one of his normal performances. And Brad Pitt, we've seen crazy before in movies, but the way he just gives these rapid fire, like machine gun speed delivery of lines, and this movie, it has a very cerebral tone without being too obtuse for the audience to understand. Plus, I really am into like future and time travel, and this movie does have some really interesting ways of time travel. I'm not 100% sure exactly how the time travel in this film works, but I still find it fascinating. Plus, it just has a good story with a lot of twists and turns and red herrings, and I may have said too much by saying red herrings, but I digress. And I admit that I was on the edge of my seat for this movie. I'm not going to spoil what happens, assuming you don't already know, but I can honestly say this movie was actually spoiled for me, and I was still in suspense the first time I saw this movie. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But shoot, I can't talk about it without giving this away. Oh, and by the way, for 1995, I must confess the runner-up was The Usual Suspects. It was a really close call between these two, but I just had to go with 12 Monkeys. It was close. Maybe I could have gone for another tie, but like I said, trying to cut ties down. But if you're a big Usual Suspects fan, just know it was really, really close. And my pick for 1996 is Fargo. I'm going to say this now because they will come up again. I am a big fan of the Coen brothers. I think they might just be the most innovative filmmakers out there. Every time they make a movie, it is a unique experience, and they always bring something unique and special to the table. And at the time, this was their most acclaimed movie. Arguably, it could still be their most acclaimed movie. I remember Gene Siskel said it was the last really great movie he saw. And where do I even begin with what makes this movie so great? First, you have a great hero in Marge Gunderson, and she is such a good character because she's so very wholesome and down to earth, but she's still such a competent cop who's able to foil these criminals. And you know, she's kind of quirky, kind of funny, but when she has to get down to business and save the day, she saves the day. And Frances McDormand, I must talk about it because I actually don't think she appears on any other movies in my list, but she really is one of my favorite actresses. She just absorbs herself into every character she plays. Like, I do not think that I'm watching Frances McDormand. I think I am watching whatever character she's playing. And this, you know, doing a mixed genre movie is not an easy task because, like, you know, how do you make a serious film that's funny, but not like making the funny stuff kill the serious moments? And how do you make a serious movie that doesn't put an utter damper on the funny moments? And this movie actually pulls it off. And I think what makes it so good is the fact that everything about this movie rings true. Like, the funny moments, it's funny. It may just be funny and serious because, you know, it's being very realistic. Like, the funny moments, like when Steve Buscemi is arguing with Peter Stormare about shutting up. That's a very funny bit of dialogue, and it sounds like a conversation that two people would really have. And it's all the more funny because, you know, these are the criminals, and you expect them to be, you know, criminal masterminds, but instead they're arguing like two people would really argue. And William H. Macy is always good. He's good. He's another actor who I like in just about everything I've seen him in. He plays this character who's just, you know, he's the one who's trying to do all this, but he's such a cowardly, wimpy man who just hates everything. And, you know, he's obviously the villain, but at the same time, you kind of sympathize with him a bit because he's just, everything is crushing down on him. But you know what? If you haven't seen Fargo, see it. That's all I really gotta say about this movie. My pick for 1997 is Liar Liar. You know, I have to say, a lot of these are like obvious. You know, they were the smash hit, they were the biggest hits of the years. A lot of these were like Oscar winners. This one, I gotta go with the personal choice. Liar Liar is a movie I have loved since I was a kid. And, you know something? Talking about Wayne's World and how I'm surprised that holds up, this is another movie that really holds up very well, because Jim Carrey is just so funny in this movie. Like, I read that Steve Martin was originally supposed to be cast in this. I like Steve Martin and all, but the thing is, Jim Carrey does in this movie, it's hard for me to imagine anybody else playing this. You know, he does so much physical comedy, like when he's beating himself up and torturing himself with the pen that I hold in my hand is royal blue, and trying to lie when he can't, and And like when his secretary is asking him questions, I love. There are subtle things like he's saying no, but his body language says yes. He's like no, yes. I just find that stuff very funny, and not to mention the fact that they're actually, this movie does, for how funny this movie is, it still has a lot of heart in it, because there's still, you know, he really does care for his son, but his selfishness just gets in the way all the time. And it is sweet seeing how he does eventually come around and realize it. And, you know, this is the sort of thing that can be very hackneyed and forced, but it actually comes off as very sweet. And I was actually hoping to keep the video going a little longer, talking about more movies, but guess what? I gotta charge the battery on my camera, so I'll be back. We're going on for, next video will be 1998 to whenever. Hopefully since I'll have my battery charged up, that means I'll be able to go on for a little longer. So, see you all next time.